for taking the time to do this for us.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Uh, we have most of us here. There are two other guys who are missing who are out of town, but are going to be watching the video at some point in the future. Bunch of guys in their 50s, some in their 60s. Probably a group of people that represents a good majority of your clients and your patients.
Uh-huh.
We have had the discussion about health. It's always top of mind for us. Um, a lot of different questions, a lot of different solutions. I thought it'd be helpful, and a lot of these questions are rooted around a lot of stuff that you helped me with. So I thought it would be helpful, along with some questions that we put together for you. I don't know if
Sure.
Missy shared those with you or not.
She did. That's
Okay.
and, and I do have I know you and Misty may have talked. Yeah, I've got slides, but I don't they're more talking points, so we can
Yeah.
kind of I think it answers all those questions
Yeah. I was
and
thinking
also
we
give
would
a
do
little perspective.
very more of a conversational type, and I mean, we can use the slides if we need to, certainly. I think a lot of us have very similar questions, mostly like top three, top five, with guys in their 50s and 60s. What are some of the things that we should be
Sure.
focusing on? What are some of the tests that we should be looking for? Jim, one
Yes.
of his questions was very much at the root of a lot of us, is we have seen traditional doctors in the past. They were very reactionary. We'd rather be more proactive in our health. Perhaps our standards may not be what the typical, or perhaps we want more than just what the typical male, U.S. male in their 50s and 60s is getting. Um,
Yeah.
but what are the maybe top three or four or five things? As long as we answer these types of questions, it'd be helpful. What should we be focusing on at our age? What are
Uh-huh.
right as yeah, the same thing. As from a proactive in our health. I know we've got
Yes.
some histories and some questions on Alzheimer's, um, things that testosterone, peptides, things of that nature. So maybe you could just kind of give us an overview of what you do, how you do it, what you're focusing on, if those things are part of the list of what we're talking about, and then we can kind of open it up for questions or follow-up questions. Would that work?
Yes. Yes. So all those things, um and I've got some great kind of summaries of all those, and actually the very last few slides actually probably summarize all of those. But um, um, so this whole thing about longevity has become a real buzzword, but this is something that we've been working on for decades, and so it's sort of an ultra preventive medicine approach, and my background was in conventional medicine originally. My first board is in emergency medicine, so I spent many years mopping up for the people that had poor health, and most of this is self-induced. So if we look at the lifestyle medicine studies, 80 to 90% of all this can actually be prevented. So the concept um, is maybe not longevity to increase your life expectancy, but actually to increase your health expectancy. And so there's this concept of the decade of decline. So we're getting our 50s and 60s, like, okay, we remember what our parents were like and our grandparents were like, you know. And so by that time, probably even, a lot of decline with that. How can we push that out? How can we compress that? Stay active, healthy, well. Because the whole concept about sick care medicine is just waiting till things break. But we're proactive. And even though I did specialty training in this, and even my last fellowship was in integrative medicine, just because I really want to know the science. Because I came out of the academic world, it's like, okay, you got to prove. And actually, kind of came into this as a little bit of a skeptic. And so, but they really proved it to me. And that's finding out those things. And most of this information is not just from some brand new longevity medicine journal. We garnered this from what's out there already. And there are mortality studies based on all those things you just talked about, whether it's nutrition, exercise, muscle building, hormone balance. There's actually mortality studies based on that, but for some reason it's gone largely ignored by conventional medicine. So that's kind of where we are. there's some key things that we need to look out for and do. Um, and if you want, I can blow through this. I'll show you the slides just so you can kind of see.
Yeah, yeah,
And
do
we sent you
that.
the concept so you can look at it. You can go into detail. This is actually a condensed version of, it's like we could talk for hours.
Sure.
But I'll try to
Yeah,
give you a flavor
that's
for what that is, but I'll also give you a summary at the end. That's the plan. It's like, okay, what are the 5 or 10 things that I need to be doing now? Most of them start with your lifestyle.
Yeah.
They're not all the high tech fancy things, and I'll show you those things, but 90% of this, 80 to 90% of this is going to be what you should be doing now. So can I share my screen with you?
yeah. Yes, please.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
Number one is put the French fries down.
Stop
I
much.
can't see what you're eating there, so
Protein.
Grilled chicken and lettuce. Stop drinking alcohol.
in my
that's what I
honor,
do.
you knew I was coming. So I just put this up here. My journey's been a little bit convoluted, but in this whole goal about starting with good medicine, and that's kind of where I got here. My stint in the military was actually about being mission ready, but then I realized in the civilian world we don't have that, but we should be mission ready for life. And then even working in the technology industry, aerospace medicine was my sort of my last thing before I got out of the Navy. And that was one of the things that really dawned on me. We're taking middle-aged pilots and we're testing the heck out of them to find out who's going to perform, not just get by, not just not have a disease, which is the last thing, but perform. This is about performance health. And then finally, I discovered a group called the American Academy of Anti-Aging when I was trying to find out how to help my dad. He had Parkinson's at the end of his life, which was miserable. So how do I prevent that? And to my surprise, there's tons of research and literature on that. And over the past 20 years, more and more has even come out, even since I was at GW. So this is the difference of 50 years. 1952, very young, vibrant, and by the time he got to, 70s, this was not a good scenario. He lived 10 more years after that picture, but the last 10 years not good. The so-called decade of decline, I'm trying desperately to prevent that.
Yep.
You can pick. Do you want to be the guy on the left? Do you want to be the guy on the right? Guy on the right is like 88-year-old supermodel in China. And just amazing. But this is all possible, right?
So for you.
So there's science behind this, is kind of what this slide is like. So we know what's going on. We understand the science of aging, and conventional medicine has given us some answers, but it isn't following conventional medicine literature or treatment because there's not drugs or surgeries for most of this stuff. It's about health span, not
Yeah.
necessarily lifespan, but I want to be good for as long as I can possibly be. And even something simple as Mediterranean diet and walking, starting at looking at older people, we still could have improved quality of life and longevity. So we can do this. The decade of decline is actually more like 15 years, especially for women. Women are not as healthy as men for age match as we get older, but we know that there's healthy life expectancy and life expectancy. We want to shrink that last piece there. Again, there's science behind this, and we know how to go after that. The dementia, cancer, heart disease, all that stuff is not normal aging. Those are diseases. Those are diseases of aging. And some would say that actually aging is a disease, which has kind of turned us around and why there's so much focus on this now. So you just asked me like, okay, what should we be paying attention to? Muscle is king. Probably the number one longevity factor that you can see is actually make muscle. And we've learned since I was in school that yes, we do make more muscle past our age 20 or 30, and we can do this. Making sure that there's something called the mitochondria, as you may remember from biology. That's where energy is made, and that's probably related to every disease of aging is related to mitochondrial dysfunction. There's something called NAD, which is connected to mitochondria. And aging is an inflammatory condition and accelerates that. So we know how to do some natural medicine things to help short circuit that chronic inflammation. And then metabolic health, whether it's your cholesterol or your blood sugar, we've got to get good control of that. It's been studied observationally, so you probably heard of the blue zones, but we learned some good lessons about that. And most of what the blue zones is about lifestyle. They have no fancy technology or supplements or hormones to take even, but it's about living healthy and living in your community and being important to the people that are around you. The other thing, so seeing your group together, which is kind of a very good thing. It's a very good social connectedness. But you also know that your health status is contagious. So if one or two of you, like Alfredo, if you can start being healthier, look, you've just infected your friends around you. And so that actually bears out in the literature to be true. Social determinants are also important too. So loneliness is just as bad as diabetes. So we know that there's other components that are related to that. And then what's the lifestyle? What is that? Healthy diet. Mediterranean diet is the most well-studied healthy diet on the planet. Time restricted eating. So it doesn't have to be fancy or long fast. It could just be you shouldn't be eating corn chips until you go to bed at night. We need to have time where we let our gut and our brain rest. Exercise key. Take care of your gut. This chronic stress also just as bad as any other chronic disease. We've got to sleep and we've got to be connected. The diet, this is something you can do. You don't have to pay $1 million to have this fancy diet there. Eat plants, get enough animal protein that's high quality and not contaminated food. Avoid the high fructose corn syrup and sugars. Probably should eliminate alcohol. We used to talk about heart healthy alcohol, but alcohol is really no good for the brain. There's no good healthy dose of alcohol for your brain. Stay hydrated and even drinking coffee. So unfortunately, I love coffee, so that's good for me. But there's even a study showing that there's a 12% lower mortality rate in people that were coffee drinkers. Even a small amount of coffee in those that might be caffeine sensitive can still do it, and even decaf work. So stuff like that, it's in the mainstream literature, but they're not talking about that because it's not a drug. Eat protein. There's a myth that protein as we age, you didn't need as much. Actually, you need more. And at least a gram per kilo, probably more. So that's not always easy to do. So I'm on the hunt for protein every meal. You got to make sure you're getting
Really
that.
hard.
Animal protein is better. Very difficult to get the amino acid mix if you're a vegan or vegetarian. And then you just eat during the day. Don't eat at night. And then, of course, you got to have enough protein and then you go exercise. So you maintain or build your muscle mass, which helps with your longevity. Exercise is very good. There's actually the Harvard study showed there's a 2-for-1. Um, for every 2 hours of exercise, there's actually an hour of longevity. It's amazing. So it kind of reminds me of there's the cigarette smoking study. For every cigarette you smoke, you lose 7 minutes of your life. So this is just the opposite. And if you only have a short amount of time in your schedule to exercise, and they talk about 150 minutes a week for exercise, but you gotta make it work. You gotta be more vigorous with that and build up as you tolerate with that. But 21% reducing your mortality. It's just amazing how that's free, basically. Um, it reduces cancer risk. So all the different types of cancer. Be good to your gut. It's all the junk we put in it, the processed foods, the gluten. There's been a huge increase in celiac disease, but partly I think it's because our gluten exposure and we're a very bread-centric society. So we just got to move away from that so we can have healthier gut, because also healthier gut is also healthier brain. So we know that. Your immune system lives here. So as we age, part of what gets people is the immune dysfunction, which is a setup for cancer, and then also overwhelming infections, which get a lot of older people. Got to sleep 7 hours. That's sort of the cutoff. Less than 7 hours, you're increasing your mortality. It's hard to lose weight under 7 hours. There's more obesity under 7 hours. There's more chronic fatigue and cognitive dysfunction. And you just got to set a schedule and take care of your sleep. Very protected. Stress is, it's bad as inactivity. It shortens your life. And there's some physical things that are going on, and we test for these things. We look at the cortisol levels. We do something called a saliva test, where we can look at what's your stress level throughout the day. And of course, now there's a bunch of wearables that will help you do that too. but we need some stress, or you're just not motivated to work and pay the mortgage and do those things. But you gotta pay attention to that, and particularly as men, we tend to put our head down and go, and we just work. You just got to get through the day. You got to get it done. But we're this is where all this idea about burnout is coming from, and also that's a very big danger sign, about impaired longevity. Lots of ways to do that. Now there's apps for everything for trying to do your meditation, your mind body work. But it's also when we're eating like crap and we're trying to feed our cortisol, we're exacerbating that. If we're not eating the right
Yeah.
things, if we're nutritionally deficient, if our gut is a wreck, then that's exacerbated. It's just feeding this whole stress cycle. And so that reduces our longevity. Do this. Join a community. Be together. Be important. Practice your faith. Those cost us nothing to do that, but so important, and particularly in the Blue Zone study, they didn't have hormones or supplements to take. This is the practice. So kind of getting at some of the specific answers, maybe some of the things that you're thinking about. Common supplements. I like to think of this as sort of a tiered sort of approach to this. And some people come and they want, I like creatine. We'll talk about that in a second too. They want to do that. They want to take the advanced supplement for NAD, or they want to take peptides, but maybe their vitamin D levels in the tank.
Okay.
We've got to go to foundational sort of thing. We can't skip over some of those things. And so nutritional levels is really, very important. Even something as simple as omega-3 fish oils. The studies looking at the lowest level group to the highest level group is a 34% lower risk of death just by correcting that. And so this is seems so simple that
What's
people jump skip.
CoQ10? I've heard of it before, but I don't know what it is.
Related cholesterol.
What's that?
CoQ10
Is the source.
CoQ10. I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Wait, could you just dive a little bit deeper in CoQ10?
Yeah, so CoQ10, so interesting. So this was one of my first aha moments because I don't know, probably 20 years ago, I was looking up stuff for what helps Parkinson's and the brain function, and there was a study on CoQ10 and Parkinson's, but it's because it is an essential cofactor for making energy in the mitochondria. And so it's also a very important internal antioxidant. So it helps to protect the mitochondria. So it's sort of like the furnace. The side effect of the furnace is the heat, and heat can actually cause surrounding damage if it's not contained. So super important. It's also the key nutrient, the famous one for being suppressed when people are on cholesterol medicines. So it's probably one of the contributors to the intolerance with the statin medications, because people get suppressed CoQ10. So very important. It's a base nutrient. We measure those levels to make sure that we're getting enough of that. In fact, we can measure all the levels. We can measure all the levels of the vitamins and minerals. The other reason it's really important, it's one of the hallmarks of aging called decreased nutrient sensing. So for the same level of nutrient that you have, we may not process it or absorb it enough or as well. So we want to make sure we're at least on par. But there's a couple of key nutrients that need to be above the accepted ranges. CoQ10 is one of them. Omega-3s, vitamin D, and B12. Because there's clear studies on those need to be more than adequate. They need to be in the upper part of the range there. So my example for vitamin D, again, so important. Everybody thinks about bone health and healthy bones and teeth and all that, but critical for the immune function and normalizing immune function. And that became really popular during COVID because they showed that low vitamin D level people died more of COVID. And it's just because it's important for normal immune function. So that could be one of the final killers of us later in life, either through cancer or through overwhelming infection. And again, they all function in the healthy nervous system and brain. So if you want to prevent Alzheimer's, make sure the base is covered and the foundation is.
I'm going to violate a rule and go back one slide. So sleep is a big one. We've talked about sleep in here a lot. And my sleep pattern is I fall asleep. No problem. I sleep for a few hours. I wake up. And then the question is, how long will I be up or do I just get up? And so basically every night I fall asleep early. I try to go to bed at the same time every night, not, look at the computer, all that kind of stuff, de-stress. I'll fall asleep 10 o'clock, sleep anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, and then wake up, and then it's a crapshoot of whether or not I can go back to sleep.
Mhm, mhm. So that's common for the stress response with that. And so different strategies, of course, monitoring and modulating the adrenal response. But it's also kind of what we're doing during the daytime, because we forget we're not managing our stress during the day. And so our subconscious is still going to be working on that at night. And so, and of course, we prefer to do, non-drug approach and do some natural things towards the evening, but it's also some of the things that we're doing in the day to try to help create that normal stress curve. But then it's things you have to work on gradually, like the whole mind body work, the meditation, to let the brain learn that it can settle down. It doesn't click into flight or fight mode. And so that's a longer term sort of process. But um, so it's a lot of things, including your gut health comes into play with that, because the gut and the brain health is related to that. And that can also be another disruptor with that. All else fails, if you had to use some kind of medical approach, you want to pick something that's least risky to do that. And so that's very common for us.
Vaccines good.
Um,
Better though.
so there's a long list. This is just like a short list for things you may see for supplements for longevity. Again, you should do the basics before you hop, skip, and on these. And so one really popular one's called NAD plus. There's some supplementation to help raise that. It's sort of like in a way, kind of like CoQ10 as far as working in the mitochondria to help fix that. Um, the animal studies look really good. The human studies haven't been as profound. And so it still may be worth adding on and doing, but not not substituting some of the basics that you're doing. So that one still could be a reasonable supplementation, but the human studies haven't been really gangbusters like we hoped they would be. Glutathione can be a very important antioxidant and modulate our immune system too. And with people who are chronically stressed, that can be depleted. We do measure levels of that, and there's some natural ways to try to help support that. There's some recent interest in something called methylene blue. Again, working in the mitochondria is also seen to help with brain function and neurotransmitter function. Of course, all these other ones, DHEA is actually an important hormone from the adrenals, which can be associated with stress response, maybe longevity and glucose control. The last one on the list is the creatine. It's interesting someone asked about that because actually just last year there was another study that came out that actually associated mortality risk reduction. So it's so interesting to see this come about because this is a really popular supplement. When I was younger, probably we're about the same age when we were younger and working in the gym, making muscle. And then the studies came out looking at endurance athletes. It seemed to help them. And part of the way we understand it's working is actually also in helping to improve intracellular ATP, which is your energy coin of the cell. And then there's a study suggesting that it improved cognition. Not 100%, but that looked good. So that made it come back popular again. A couple other things. So creatine has the strongest human data. And so in the study last year by this big group called NHANES, they're a very large longitudinal health study. It's a nutrition health outcomes. So 15% lower all-cause mortality, and they only used a gram of creatine. I would recommend about 5 grams a day, which is a typical. Some people are loading it, which is probably not necessary. And then there's some supplement companies out there suggesting we need to take a lot more, but probably 5 grams of creatine a day is plenty. Above that, I start seeing people get water retention and get puffy sometimes from GI pollen.
It's like drinking water.
You got to hydrate. Got to hydrate with creatine. NAD precursors, certainly taking them orally does raise your NAD levels. Like I said, the mixed outcomes with the human studies. Personally, I've kept it in my regimen just because I think it could have some benefit, there. But The other study was a marginally improvement, maybe in Parkinson's and neuro and brain function. The diabetes study wasn't really hugely positive either, but it's non-toxic. I think if you had, once you've taken care of all the other things, if you wanted to, that would be reasonable to add that. Two others that have been hot on social media, certainly in my feed, as you might imagine, I'm looking at this stuff all the time. Something called urolithin A. Small studies showed small improvement in muscle mass in older adults, so that could be helpful. And then fatty 15 is another one that's come out. Actually, the studies that were published last year actually look more promising. So that one, could be reasonable, non-toxic. It's only toxic to your wallet, because all these are not cheap supplements. And so that's why I try to help prioritize myself even as well. It's like, okay, what's worth it? There's only so much time and capsule count you can take a day. So that's our other approach is I help you be more practical. It's like, let's prioritize, let's find out the labs and the things that are really indicated for you, and then we can kind of go down the list as far as the things that might be practical to add on, to that. Hormone balance. So there's clearly studies on men and testosterone and mortality. So low testosterone men have a higher mortality rate. Clearly, another study looked at like, well, how high is needed? So middle-aged men, they did a study looking at mortality rates, and they actually gave us the levels. Men with a total testosterone of less than 800 started increasing their mortality rate. So when we kind of look at a number, it's like, well, what's our target? It doesn't need to be 1800, but maybe it needs to be at least 800. So there's clear data on that. Hormones too, men, we think of testosterone, women think of estrogen, but cortisol is a hormone, insulin's a hormone, thyroid hormone. And so there's studies with all those things in balance and levels that are associated with mortality and longevity. And we want to optimize those and normalize those. The standard ranges for that are broad. And so if you're looking at anything, whether it's business, your investments, do you want to be in the lowest quartile of your industry? You want to be in the upper quartile of your industry. So you could still be in the normal accepted range for the industry, but that's not healthy for your company. Same is true for your hormones in general. And so, but we got to measure and we got to know what response that we're getting. The first thing is, I won't go through all this, but the worst case scenario is when people are high stress, high cortisol, which increases their glucose, increases their insulin, which can actually in turn suppress the thyroid. And then also that high stress situation can start decreasing the loss of sex hormones faster as you age. So earlier and earlier, I'm seeing younger and younger men with low testosterone. And so it's epidemic. So that's the worst case scenario, and that has cascaded to all the rest of these things. So you need to know your levels, and then you need to have the appropriate optimization of that. Peptides. So those have become really more popular in recent years too. This has been one of the cornerstones that we've always done in functional medicine versus conventional medicine. But what is a peptide? Sometimes you hear about peptides that people eat and drink and those kind of things. It's just the size of the molecule. These are amino acid strings, but it's key. It's like however you put in the code is how the peptide is going to work and where it goes in the body. So some peptides help with glucose control, like the peptide medications like Ozempic and Mounjaro. Insulin itself is a peptide. The hormone thyroid is a peptide. But there are other peptides that help to enhance growth hormone release. That's a peptide. It's hitting the receptors in the brain to help us improve that, which we typically lose as we age. Then there are other really helpful peptides that may help reduce and control inflammation. One of the ones we use a lot that has really good studies on is something called BPC 157. Amazing the research. Actually, again, another medical research article came out on that in 2025 that spelled out the deep science on the mechanism of action. So it's a real thing, and so they really do work. I think someone asked about TB500, another one I like. There's very good studies on that. It has been on the restricted list as of late with the FDA, but it looks like that one's going to come back. And so we use a lot of these peptides, but right now in the industry, we just have to be careful that we're getting the peptides from a pharmacy because there are these lab companies out there on the internet that are selling peptides, And they're doing that because they're skirting the regulations from the FDA. So I'm a big fan of these. I'm a big fan of the ones that have human research on. There's a bunch that are out there that have a lot of animal studies on it, or they're similar molecules, but they may not have as much of the human research data on that. And so we gravitate to the ones with the best human research on that for the safety and efficacy with that. And here's just a list of some of the ones that are out there today. The first two are more for growth hormone. Semaglutide, tirzepatide are the GLP-1s that are related to glucose control, which some very fascinating studies on those looking at preventive health. And we're doing something called microdosing for some of these where people may or may not need to have weight loss with that, but there's some long-term protective effect, perhaps. Again, kind of next level sort of things to do. CJC, ipamorelin, IGF-1, those are growth hormone. BPC 500, I'm sorry, BPC 157, TB 500, great for inflammation and repair. And then the GHK-Cu, it's a copper peptide. It looks like it's very promising for collagen support. So, any questions about that? I know that's a big area of interest.
Now, one of the comments was, how do you take all this stuff in one day?
No,
That's right. So that's the practical approach. And that's how you build a program based on what you have and what you can do, right? So as Alfredo will tell you, it's quite comprehensive. And if you're not a little overwhelmed, at the end, then I probably haven't given you enough, right? Right, Alfredo? So it's about finding that out and then also the execution, which is kind of how our approach is, it's a discovery time with that, and it's adult learning, I call it, with me as we're going through the science and the application. And then you got to have someone help you execute. And so, and Misty's our person that helps you do that, to coach you along to be able to do that and find she literally is working with you to find what's practical for you to fit in there, and depending on your schedule, whether it's work or travel or just, your ability to handle that, we try to help you prioritize what's your foundation and build from there. Let's see what else.
Dr. Flowers, you have a bunch of type A's in the room, which is not shocking. What's the sort of process from your standpoint? Maybe you went through that a little bit. Just like to understand. You come, you get a panel done, you prioritize maybe where you're deficient or where you should focus. Maybe just a high level view of that.
Yeah. So the know your numbers, that's kind of where we start. So everybody that comes to practice, there's a initial consultation. Misty Croft is the person that she's our nurse director, and so she handles that to try to help you discover where to start with that and what your health issues goals are with that, and we decide where do we begin. There's lots and lots of things we do, but we need to start out with some data, and so. We're a results-oriented organization too. We want to know what your data is, so we know where to build our targets and to do that. This is just kind of a list of those things where we might begin, and so that depends on, where you are, what your health issues are, what your health goals are with that. Once that's done, so we get that ahead of time, and then I get and review that, and then the day you come for your visit, it's a 2 to 3 hour visit where we go through the discovery. We look at everything. We look at your health status, your physical status. I have reviewed everything, and we have made a comprehensive plan ahead of time to review with you. And then, of course, there's the session for the execution part of the plan. We're tracking these things. We're following the results. So at least initially, we're doing quarterly visits where we're looking at all of this. And our goal is integrative and functional. So we're trying to help you avoid ever having to use medications. And on the whole, we do avoid that. But if there's a case where maybe you have a condition that requires that, then we approach that with a sort of a risk-benefit analysis every time we look at that. And then we track that along as well. Someone asked about imaging. So again, this could be a part of that depending on your desire and risk. And so we have all these things available, including full body MRI, which I think in recent years has finally reached the point that I'm comfortable with for what we call sensitivity, that its ability to pick up what we're looking for, particularly spots that might be cancer. and also specificity to find, is it real or is it not? Because in the past, a lot of times people were doing these screenings that might pick up things that maybe aren't cancer or aren't significant. So it was harder to kind of tease those out. So I think the technology is good enough now, and they're using some AI assisted technology to help us figure that out. Cardiac scans, probably most everybody needs to at least know their calcium score. So everybody like is looking at cholesterol, but cholesterol is not the heart disease. It can be a promoter, but we need to know. And at our age, there's no reason why we shouldn't know. People are recommending getting a colonoscopy to make sure you don't have a colon cancer, but we should know the status of our coronary arteries not long before it suddenly pops up that you have a heart attack or a stroke, which is half the time. Which with the technology today in medicine, why are they waiting? It's just I can't understand that. And as long as this has been around, but they're a snap to give you a statin, but they won't like actually know what's going on in your artery.
It's the insurance companies.
They are driving it. They are the big decision maker for your health, not us. So yeah, so we've stepped outside of that. 'Cause I can't have them telling me what to do anymore. It's not right. Knowing your bone density, knowing your body composition, knowing your muscle mass. And then the last one, another correlation with longevity is your fitness level. The VO2 max is actually a test where they breathe to see what your maximum exercise capacity is, basically. So that's another correlation with longevity. So those are things you can get to know and track. There's a lot of technology out there. This is sort of additional. There are some studies, though, on sauna and reducing. There's a big Finnish study about 10 years ago that showed that several times a week in the sauna actually dramatically reduced mortality rates. But there's all this other stuff. But this is kind of next level stuff. You need to take care of the foundation first. You need to do the lifestyle medicine first. And so, like I said, this is sort of the plan. So what should I be doing? So it's kind of the summary of all that. Healthy plant-based diet, good animal protein, no extra sugar. We don't need anything extra, starchy, sugar, bread. We can live very well without that. We should be exercising 150 minutes a week is sort of the minimum, but you got to make it count. If you're only doing 30 minutes a day, you got to make it count. We need to sleep. We need to control our stress. Do this. We need to socialize. We need to have our tribe. That's what we're designed for.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I got one.
Hormesis, funny name. Hormesis, we've got to stress the system a little bit. So that's part of what this fasting thing is. Sauna is a very good example, hyperbaric oxygen, exercise. So we do stress the system a little bit so that it triggers it to repair itself. Key nutrients, do the basis first. Make sure you're not deficient. And then maybe you can go to the extra things. You can do the NAD and other things on top of that. But I try to go with the ones that have the best. This is how we say, well, how much can you take and what do you need to do? We take it to that point. I try to get the basis and the most important ones, and then we can, because everybody, sometimes it's hard to tease out the science from the advertisement. And so we try to help you do that. So that's it.
Awesome.
Any specific questions that you guys might have currently? If something comes up, just let me know. Have the floor.
Well, let's run through the ones that we got and then.
Yeah. I think you answered a good bit of them, but
Yeah.
you've got
Just specifically on Alzheimer's.
Yes.
My mother died of Alzheimer's. I have the marker APO4, whatever that is.
Uh-huh.
I'm in good health, reasonably. What should I be doing? Should I go see a neurologist early? And is there testing I should do, or is it just eat, sleep, and don't drink alcohol and all that stuff?
Yeah, these are all the things. So we see a bunch of ApoE4 people. So do you know if you have one ApoE4 or two?
I don't know that answer.
So that changes the risk. So in the population, about 8% risk of developing
Yeah,
Alzheimer's.
right.
The ApoE4 group, if you have one gene from one parent, that's about 27%. If you have two of them, you have one from each parent. So we get one gene from one parent, one gene from the other. If you have the unfortunate case where you get both, that's about 50-50. But the catch is everybody that has ApoE4 doesn't get Alzheimer's, and the majority of people with Alzheimer's don't have ApoE4.
Hmm.
So that's not your death sentence. with that. But what happens to ApoE4 people? Well, they tend to have more inflammation. They tend to have probably more oxidative stress. They tend to have higher cholesterols, which maybe be related more to inflammation than the cholesterol itself. And so again, not a death sentence. So Alzheimer's is multifactorial disease. And some of the final common pathways, well, the final common pathway is mitochondrial dysfunction. So you got to make sure your body's got the energy, it's got the tools, it's got the nutrients. You got to control inflammation, control oxidative stress, um, control your hormone balance. So we know that's another very key thing. So near and dear to my heart too, because Parkinson's and Alzheimer's are both neurodegenerative disorders. They just hit different parts of the brain, but they're very similar cousins, with that. So this is sort of the entourage effect of doing all these things. There's not a silver bullet because you have ApoE4. It's all the things that you should be doing. It's interesting though. So you have the higher risk, but ApoE4 people tend to be better responders to things like exercise, hormone balance, omega-3s, all those things. Isn't that interesting that they may have a more amplified response to do the good things, but they have also the higher need to do that. So if you're interested in some good reading on that, there's a guy named Dale Bredesen that wrote The End of Alzheimer's. So he is a research neurologist sort of backed into functional medicine. And what he points out is there's multiple insults that are happening to the brain. And so that's why there's probably never going to be a single drug for Alzheimer's to fix Alzheimer's. And then what they also found that the drugs that they were trying to do for Alzheimer's, a very, new one just came out to try to dissolve the plaque, the protein in the brain in those cells. That's the end problem. But what's causing that plaque to build up in the brain is where the answer is. And so it's kind of interesting that they got these drugs to the FDA when they're marginal or no improvement. But the problem is not trying to dissolve the plaque. It's actually why do you get the plaque? In some of the studies earlier, some of the drugs have failed because when they dissolved the plaque, the patient got worse. So maybe the plaque's there because it's trying to protect you from something. But it's amazing how the research seems to be going at it from the opposite end as far as we're concerned. So Dr. Bredesen says there's about 30 different causes of Alzheimer's. One of the most common is why the studies are really good with females as far as Alzheimer's, but also males for testosterone, females for estrogen. It's called atrophic Alzheimer's. And then it just kind of goes down the list of all the other things and all these other insults that we just talked about that are creating hits to our longevity are actually hurting our brain as well. So,
Thank you.
Did you say another? You got two questions or?
That's good, buddy.
Any other questions?
I have a question on testosterone. So, two things that have caused me to not sort of look into my testosterone level and take testosterone. The two factors which you can disabuse me of if you disagree. The first is I've had a couple cancers, and I was under this impression that testosterone might speed up cell recovery and generation or whatever. So I thought, well, perhaps if I elevate my testosterone levels, it could increase the division of the cancer cells. The other thing that concerned me is starting it and not being able to your body stopping producing it naturally. So once you start it, you've got to sort of stay on it forever. So
Sure.
could you address those two issues?
yes, yeah. So it's interesting. I kind of grew up with, hey, testosterone could cause prostate cancer, so we were kind of taught that and believed that. About 10 years ago, there's a Harvard urologist named Abraham Morgenthaler wrote this book called Testosterone for Life. So that's a really good read. It's not a long book. Still applies today, but he realized that he didn't remember seeing the research study that connected testosterone and cancer, and so he started looking into it. As it turns out, in his research, not only does testosterone not cause a prostate cancer, if a man has low testosterone and develops prostate cancer, they do worse. They have a more aggressive form. And that's probably related to the all-cause mortality study showing that low testosterone is associated with higher all-cause mortality for men because those men aren't as healthy. And it's affecting everything from glucose metabolism to brain function and maybe immune function. So that may be where it could actually be protective against cancers and not actually promoting the cancer because it's not indiscriminately trying to raise cell division. It's actually supporting healthy metabolism, even though it tends to be more of a thought of as an anabolic hormone, where it is helping to preserve muscle mass and bone density with that as well. Um, there are different ways to raise your testosterone. So you don't always have to go straight to testosterone. So there's truth to that. Once you take testosterone, you have to take enough to sort of turn off the switch a little bit. And so it does take over for you. But I have ways of trying to enhance testosterone so that I try to preserve your own production for as long as possible. And then if reach to a certain point where, so the way I think about it is your testosterone system is controlled like your HVAC. There's a thermostat and there's the furnace. And so a lot of times earlier as we age, the thermostat's not working good enough. It's not turning up the signal to testicular function enough. And so we take that a long way. So maybe we can adjust the thermostat to enhance your own production. I like that the best. If for some reason we age enough or there's some other issue that's not working anymore, then we move to feeding the furnace directly, giving you the testosterone. So there are other ways to help raise testosterone, not the least of which is actually correcting a lot of these sort of metabolic issues. And I've seen some younger middle-aged men, we've essentially doubled their natural testosterone level by correcting all these other things. So you're not stuck.